Welcome to Anansi and the Book of Night. This is chapter 4. I'm the author, Rubidiri Victor. If you check online, you'll see chapters 1 and 2. There's a reading for chapters 1 and 2, and there's also a reading for chapter 3. Let me catch you up to what has happened thus far. Anansi has been invited by the kingdom of bats to find their king who has disappeared and has left only an outline in dust. Meanwhile, more and more bats are disappearing. Meanwhile, bees have also started disappearing. This she finds out from her husband, the lion prince, who's been called away on a secret mission suddenly. Anansi, flustered by this proliferation of disappearances, rushes to the bee queen to find out what she knows. When she does find out, she ponders and ponders. Meanwhile, the kingdom is in a crisis. The bees and bats are the ones who pollinate flowers and fruits and day and night. That means that fruits and flowers start to disappear. The kingdom is going into drought. The food stocks of the kingdom are drying up. The forests are going into drought. The animals are starting to starve. They're starting to use their food stores. Crisis. And Nancy begins to wonder, how come the whole set, most animals are becoming thin, but at the same time there's a batch of animals who are becoming fat. How is that possible? She starts to observe the fat animals and the way that they're always shoo-shooing and speaking in corners. And then she realizes that Hawk, who is a member of the Council of Elders of the Kingdom, is also one of the animals who's getting fat. On a day that she finds that the fat animals, are getting very, very animated, she follows Hawk and follows him to a secret meeting that is being held by 7 members of the Council of Elders and a number of other fat animals. At the center of that meeting, at the center table, is Tiger Cat. And Tiger Cat makes this terrifying statement in the middle of the gathering, the secret gathering, that they're going to overthrow King Lion and take the throne. And that's where we're joining, beginning of chapter 4, the Tower and the Sorrowful Caravan. The meeting was over. Anansi had not heard many details of the plan. They all had leaned in and spoke in whispers after Tiger Cat's shocking statement. Brave Hawk had insisted on it. Anansi had to lean in, but all she heard was stray words and talk of shipments and deliveries. As the group all dispersed, Anansi knew that she now had to follow Tiger Cat. She followed Tiger Cat for hours. He went on a long walk through the inner forest, around the palace, into the deep forest behind, and then out of the outskirts of the kingdom proper, where the rivers ran wild. There, on a lonely road, covered in mist, Tiger Cat waited. After about an hour, the sound of something heavy on slow wheels came rolling towards him. Out of the mist came a shadow animal who wore a hood over its face and a long robe. It was followed by massive carts full of fruits and vegetables. Anansi could not see who or what was drawing them. Tiger Cat handed the tall shadow animal something wrapped in cloth, and the shadow animal gestured towards the carts of food. They did not exchange a word between them. Tiger Cat moved off with the carts drawn by the mysterious figures Anansi could not see. Anansi made up her mind there and then to switch her target again. She now was determined to follow the shadow animal. The mysterious rogue animal bundled the object Tiger Cat gave it under its cloak and began to make its way up the mountain range from where the rivers flowed and down the other side. They were now outside of the boundaries of the kingdom behind the throne. They traveled for many, many hours. Anansi was worried that she could not find her way back. The landscape was strange. After much time, they came upon a place where the forest ended. The shadow animal continued out beyond the tree line. Anansi came up to the edge of the forest, leaned on a tree, and looked out onto a weird vista. Right outside the forest lay a gently sloping grassy field, at the base of which lay a massive wooden shed. Ahead of it, at the top of a slight slope, was a colossal stone tower with large doors at its base. The stone tower stood on the brink of a vast desert, which stretched out as far as the eye could see. Although it was night, the sky of the desert looked dark pink. As Anansi watched, she saw the shadow animal head towards the large shed at the bottom of the slope. The shadow animal knocked twice. A voice called out to it, and it answered. Anansi could not hear what they said or the language they were speaking. The door of the shed opened, and what Anansi saw next shattered her and left her mouth open. Out of the shed came more tall shadow animals in hoods and cloaks, followed by some bulls. But behind them came hundreds of animals in chains. The heavy chains were around their necks, wings, and feet. Hundreds of bats and bees, and even some other animals like horses and roosters were mixed in. Anansi could not believe her eyes. The chained animals' heads were all down. They looked crushed, beaten. The sorrowful caravan made its way out of the shed. There were more bulls and shadow animals bringing up the rear, prodding the unfortunate animals with large sticks and clubs. Amongst the chained animals, Anansi recognized many friends. She wanted to shout out, but she knew it would be fruitless and would spell only danger for her. The line of captors and captives walked up the slight slope until they entered the large doors at the base of the tall stone tower at the edge of the desert. Anansi waited until everyone was inside and then sprinted through the shadows, down the near slope and up the next to the side of the open tower door. She half contemplated running inside and hiding amongst the captives, but changed her mind at the last minute. She crouched behind the large open door and carefully peered inside. She could see all the chained animals crunched together. The room was filled with hundreds of them, until it could hold no more. Some were spilling out on the side. The bulls were very close to her now, pushing the excess animals into the room with their clubs. Finally, the last animals were rammed tightly in, and Anansi saw the looks of despair on the faces of the animals with marks of violence, scars and fresh blood about their faces and bodies. The sound of sobbing hung in the still, stale air. She saw a bat with a number of young bat sucklings with tears in her eyes, looking confused. Tears filled Anansi's eyes. She could see many of the shadow animals on plinths, in niches on the walls, high up above the reach of anyone below. Not that any chained animal could have reached up anyway. She was not sure how they had gotten up there. High above them, in the middle of the far wall, was the head shadow animal in its hood. It had a strange object in its hand. It held its free hand out, and the doors began to close. Anansi wished she could do something, that there was some word she could utter that could overturn the horror, that there was one act within her capacity in that moment that could redeem the tragedy and rescue every single animal, erase this memory and defeat the enemy. But the power that she had in that moment was as a witness. The large doors closed on the chained animals. The bulls did not enter, but moved back towards the large shed. Anansi began to sprint around the tower, looking for another opening, a door, a window, a vent, a crack that she could enter, something that could buy her time to conceive of a way to save her brethren. But there strangely was no other opening anywhere up or down the face of the tower. At the back of the tower, the desolate desert stretched out unforgivably. Soon she had circled the whole tower and could see the same large door she had left looming back in front of her. The doors of the far wooden shed where the bulls had gone down the slope were now locked tight. She sprinted straight up to the heavy wooden doors and placed her ears to them to see what more she could hear. She could hear a strange chanting. Then the voice of the lead shadow animal. Under the door, there was a flash of light. Then, silence. She could hear moving inside, talking, then footsteps. Headed towards her, she moved away from the door and pressed her body against the wall as the massive doors opened. The shadow animals filed out silently. The lead shadow animal was not with them. Anansi slid around the circumference of the tower, further and further from the door to remain just beyond the range of vision of the shadow animals as they walked down the slope towards the barn. She waited until the last one entered the barn, shut its door. Then she sprinted back towards the open tower to see if she could possibly free the captives. When she ran around the open door, she froze. Shock. The entire room of the tower was empty. Not one animal was in sight. Anansi felt like she was upside down in the world. Where were the hundreds of animals she had just seen? There was no other door. She looked inside for the lead shadow animal. On the closed left wall, there was a narrow staircase with no railing that led up to the very top of the high tower. She made a note of it, but she desperately needed to solve the mystery of where her friends had gone. She raced inside and froze again. Across the whole floor were hundreds of chalky dust outlines of the animals who were just there. Anansi could not comprehend the evil. She ran up in the midst of the dust, picking it up. It drained through her fingers. What was going on? Was this all that was left of her friends, of the mother with the baby bats? Dust? Anansi searched and searched for an opening, a trapdoor, anything that could dilute the horror she was witnessing. Nothing. The animals were gone. Hundreds of them disappeared in an instant. Hundreds of stories reduced to dust. Anansi fell on her knees in the dust and wept. She cried and cried, vowing to avenge the vanished. She looked up and ran up the staircase, the narrow stairs leading up to the top of the tower. As she ran, Anansi occasionally looked back at the door to see if anyone came through. No one did. Soon she reached near the top where the staircase turned the corner. In front of her was a large, dark, red door. It was slightly ajar. She knew that the lead shadow animal was in there. Hundreds of emotions swam through her brain and heart, but through her tears, she concentrated. She needed to learn more before she could act. She leaned in and listened to the door. She heard the shadow animal chanting. There was another flash of light. Then she heard the shadow animal talking to someone or other animals. Other voices answered him. The conversation concluded. She could not hear any of the details. Then there was a flash of light again. Then silence. Nancy could hear the shadow animal coming towards her by the door. She looked around frantically. Was this it? Was she going to fight? She felt the rage rise in her. The stairs were too long to run down. She was bound to be seen, and the shadow animal would then raise the alarm, and she would be quickly outnumbered. The footsteps came closer, and the door began to open. The shadow animal opened the door, stepped out of the room at the top of the stairs, and stopped. He looked around. He walked around the corner and looked down the staircase. Strange. Shrugged and walked the long walk down the tower stairs and left the building. Crouched upside down on the roof above the door in the shadows of the top of the stairs, Anansi looked on. Then, when Anansi thought that no one was about to enter the tower, she peered into the red door, warily looking for the sources of the other voices she had heard. There was no one there. In fact, there was nothing in the room except an object in a metal rigging, harness in the air, stretched and pinned to the floor and roof by 4 chains. The object in the middle was in a square metal pan. But where were the other animals that the shadow animal was talking to? Anansi entered the room carefully, crawling around the top of the door onto the roof of the inside. She did not walk on the floor. She walked on the roof to the far side of the room where the rigging lay. She looked down. The iron rigging was man-sized and rectangular with the fasteners and chains soldered into it. It held a pan in the middle where the object rested inside, fastened with a lock. It was a book. A leather-bound book with iron edges. Anansi watched it. Was this the source of the power she was witnessing? Anansi reached down and picked the lock of the rigging and removed the book. Could this be the thing that was reducing the animals to dust? She held the book in 2 hands, and in 2 of her other hands she held the ancestral amulet she had gotten in her adventure in the land of the monsters. The amulet that protected her from all enchantments. She asked her ancestors to protect her. She stared at the cover of the book. It felt heavy in her hand, and it seemed to be getting heavier every second. Soon it might be so heavy that she would no longer be able to stand on the roof holding it. She watched the cover some more, and drew her ancestors closer around her. She could feel the one that she had gotten from the old woman from her adventures with the dragons, the charm that could compel any dragon to speak. Still present in her, like a tower holding up her spine as she stood on the roof, once again harnessing her energy centers, connecting them, connecting her with the sky below her feet and the earth above her head, beneath this diabolical tower, and connecting her with the all. She opened the book. A light flashed, and a dark coldness swept across Anansi as the pages opened, and hundreds of screams poured out of the book. Could those in the shed hear it? Could those half a world hear it? It sounded so loud and so close, deafening, but as if the screams were for her ears alone. The pages of the book were as black as night. In fact, they were night. The entire room was now frosty cold, so cold. Cold like the region of the elegant gentleman. But this cold was as much from within as without. Anansi knew she was actually staring into the souls of the shadow animals. She looked intently at the pages of the book, which were still dark and featureless. She commanded the book to speak to her, to reveal itself, to reveal them. In the inky darkness of the pages, she could start to make out numbers multiplying. Then, suddenly, It all started to unfurl. Straight lines and angles, limitless mathematics, towers, buildings multiplying out into infinity, carpet covering entire planets. There were no forests, there were no animals anywhere. No, wait, yes, there were animals. 7, one from each house, in cages. Anansi's eyes opened wide in horror, then narrowed as the vision unfolded. It was like a manuscript of death. She felt as if she was tumbling down through space. Her eyes swam full of tears that could not fall, even though they were filled to the brim. Her mouth hung open, but no sound came. She looked until she felt she had seen enough. She collected herself. She had seen what she needed to see. She called herself back. She could feel herself tumbling back upwards out of the book. She was back on the roof now, holding the amulet, holding the book. The pages swam back black. She closed the book, placed it into its harness, and snapped shut the lock. She turned back towards the door, walking on the roof towards it, and exited the room, scampering down the walls alongside the stairs all the way down. Anansi now knew what the shadow animals wanted. She looked out the massive doors carefully, looking both ways and all around, and then ran all the way down the slope, past the large wooden shed, up the next slope, into the forest, and started running towards the kingdom.